We're going to be focused on data activation, and we're asking how do we really keep pace with the many changes in the ad tech industry, and what does server-side really mean? To answer all of these questions, let me introduce you to your two presenters who will make their way to the stage shortly. Tomasz Mazur is Head of Customer Acquisition for the Chalhoub Group in the UAE. He kickstarted his digital career in Berlin before an opportunity in analytics took him to Dubai. Here, he provides expertise on everything from data collection to activation and analysis, and we're very lucky to have him join us today. His colleague, who will join him on stage in just a moment, is James Schlesinger. Schlesinger. And he is the Senior Project Manager of Web Analytics, also for Chalhoub Group. He has worked at companies like Dyson, navigating heavily process-driven commercial teams amongst his many roles. He has found building a team here in Dubai a particularly rewarding experience, and he's here to tell us more about that, as well as all the trends, challenges, and opportunities in the field. Please give them both a very warm welcome. Gentlemen, please.
Hi guys, welcome to our Data Activation Masterclass. I've learned something from this competition, that not only activation is important, but also data collection. I hope all of you joined voluntarily today. We usually do this in a form of an interactive workshop, and we focus on practical aspects of data activation. So I hope all of you work with data or have some customer data, and all of you have some customers. So we're gonna learn how to activate this data across your digital channel. The agenda for today, first we're going to start with the problem statement, and I just want to start with a small intro, tell you a little bit more about Chalhoub Group, what do we do in Dubai, and explain our context, so where we're coming from, and what was the problem that we're trying to solve with James. I think it's always good to start with the problem instead of starting with technology. We're going to explain what was the problem and how do we actually use data to solve it. I'm going to speak a little bit about data activation for those of you that are new to the topic, and then I'm going to go straight into practical exercise. So working with the transactional data, then actually collecting the data, so the behavioral data on our website. And last thing is going beyond the customer data platform, so actually connecting the dots between the system. Again, the formula was supposed to be a workshop, so if you have any question, please raise your hand. It's going to be a little bit longer, so if it's just me talking, I assume it will be boring after a while. So please don't be shy, just raise your hand and we can get your microphone. You can ask your question. Of course, there is a space at the end for Q&A, but the whole topic is a little bit longer, so if you have some questions in the meantime, please ask them. Maybe one more thing, we focus on the customer data. Of course, we couldn't use and bring here data of our customers, so we just set up a dummy shop for the purpose of that conference, a couple of demo accounts with the tools that we actually use. We don't advertise for any of those tools. We don't work for them. Those are the tools that we use. There are a lot of alternatives, so we can speak about them. So that's it. Let's go straight in with the problem statement. All right, so for those of you that use iPhone, I assume majority of Dubai is actually with Apple. The problem started in 2018. I'm not sure if you've noticed, but when you open a new app on your phone, it's actually asking if you allow this app to track you. A lot of people click and say, allow app not to track. There's been also a lot of changes in the European law beginning May 2018. So the topic that it's called GDPR, that it's actually protecting your privacy and your right to be anonymous. So this is great for you as a user. It's not ideal for us that want to track you in your browser or track our digital spend online. So the problem that is happening right now in the industry is that when you come to the website and we cannot store a cookie in the browser, we cannot identify you. So we don't know where you're coming from, and we cannot see the whole history of you browsing our website. And majority of the industry actually relies on those small files, like cookies. Naturally, Apple doesn't work in the advertisement industry, unlike Google. So they don't actually need to worry about ads. They actually protect their customers. They use it as their unique selling point. And that's why they decided to block all of the third-party and then first-party cookies in all of the Safari browsers. So a lot of the browsers, like Firefox, decided to actually jump on the trend and also implement tracking protection. I think Google, as an advertiser, is a little bit behind, still using first-party cookies. But all of those changes force the ad industry to actually also change their technology to track.
Yeah, just to mention, Facebook also used third-party cookies for a long time. Then they tried to adopt a first-party cookie strategy to try and get around the ITP challenge. And obviously, a lot of behaviors that we talk about with the data is usually trying to circumvent processes and problems. So trying to mitigate that with the solution is essentially what we're trying to present here.
Yeah, it's really interesting to observe how actually Facebook and Apple are battling to push their agenda. One is an advertiser, the second one is producing software and phones. It's very interesting changes. Now, what we actually noticed in the last couple of years, COVID increased our need of digital spend, but the cost of acquiring customer goes up. So for any one of you that is advertising on Google Ads, on Facebook, on any kind of social media, you actually probably notice the increase in cost. Everyone is trying to acquire new customer, but that cost goes up over the years. So one of the first problem is that browser habits are changing. So instead of a longer discovery process, people actually have those short bursts of activity. They're focused on social media. Probably all of you have either Facebook account, maybe WhatsApp, maybe Snapchat, Instagram, but we're all glued to the phone and we're just waiting for someone to get their attention so they can click on an ad. There is increase in competition for the available ad inventory, and this drives the prices up. So because of COVID, a lot of companies started advertising here, and that also increased the cost of advertisement because everyone is trying to compete for the whole audience, and we're all on the phones and all trying to advertise for the same person. And if you don't do it in a smart way, your cost actually goes up.
One other thing, actually, Tomasz, is obviously moving to like server-side technology. It's not a free or a cheap thing to do. Obviously, relying on cookies allowed us to sort of like free ride of obviously all the tracking that was prevalent with it through the industries. But nowadays, when you have to adopt a server-side or a CAPI or a conversion API technology and send data back to our platforms to reattribute, you actually have to persist data somewhere within your tech stack before you send that data back out to third parties. So it's not an invisible cost, and we don't probably touch on that as an additional overhead in the talk, but it's definitely something to be conscientious of.
Also, ad networks are consolidating. So you've noticed that Facebook acquired Instagram, Facebook also acquired WhatsApp. Probably if they could, they would acquire Snapchat. So advertisers are consolidating, and advertisers that used to rely on cookies like Criteo are actually leaving the market. This means that you have less options to advertise because you're either in one of those three networks, and we all have to buy ads from them. Last topic is fraudulent traffic. So if you can't measure the installs that are coming to your app, you actually might suffer from something that it's called a fraudulent or a bot install. So literally someone buying a farm of devices and spamming you with installs that actually don't mean anything. They're not your actual customer. It's a very interesting legal case where Uber sued their agency in States for actually providing a fraudulent installs for many years. So this is the problem that we're facing after the COVID, and now we can speak about the solution. So we already got introduced. I work here as a head of customer acquisition at Chalhoub. James is actually in charge of our web analytics and ad tech stack. We're going to speak about our company and what we do as a team. So Chalhoub Group, for those of you who don't know, is actually a luxury partner. So we work with a lot of franchises, maybe some of the brands that you know are like brands like Lacoste, like Swarovski. We also have a joint venture with Sephora. We also have a lot of our own concepts. So we specialize in distribution, but also in retail. We're based in Dubai, and we actually try to be a gate for all of the luxury partners to come to the Middle East. I hope this one is not mine. Guys, I think it's on your screen. Let me just take this. I think it's actually on yours.
Yeah, he's on it.
This is not on my screen, so just 1 second. And we're back. So the group over the years actually evolved from being a distributor to actually a hybrid retailer nowadays. So we have not only more than 500 stores, but actually we have more than 20 websites, and we partner with brands to design their digital experience in the Middle East. We're actually very proud of the capabilities that we have in-house. Most of the digital products that we have, we developed them in-house based on Salesforce platform. But it's good to know that Chalhoub as a group invested a lot into data stack, and that transformation actually started already before COVID. So whatever you see here, we're not a team that is actually building a data warehouse. We actually leverage from a solid platform that was already built in-house, and COVID just accelerated that process. So the exercises that I'm about to show are actually assuming that you guys have some sort of a warehouse or place where you store your data. If you don't have, there are cool warehouse vendors here. We're also open to chat after this workshop and maybe tell you a little bit more about our journey, how to build a data warehouse, what kind of solutions are on the market. We use Google Cloud because it's a good fit for us, but there are plenty of other great vendors like Snowflake. So we don't advertise for a Google Cloud platform. We just say we started the journey with data activation with actually having some customer table that aggregates all of this data from different brands that we have. So not only the brands like Lacoste, but also our own concept. So we have more than 4 million customer records that we store and we can action on. So this is where our team comes into play. So we focus on 3 pillars. First one is data integrity. So we collect the data across different Chalhoub websites. So this is quite an interesting topic because Chalhoub was a group that was very brand-driven. So every brand-driven had their own collection method, their own framework of collecting the data. We built a system that allows us to collect this data in a more consistent way, so we can create commonalities. And we know that an example add to basket event on level shoes is the same as add to basket on Lacoste. We focus a lot on paid media analytics. So all of the platforms like Google Ads, like Facebook, allow you to extract the data and put this data in the data warehouse so it can be analyzed. And last pillar of our activity is digital marketing. So we take care of social ads, paid search, search engine optimization, and we use data to fuel all of those activities.
Yeah, it's worth also mentioning, as Tomasz said, we use BigQuery primarily as our data warehouse, but actually we configured it in a way where we have like 3 different layers, where we have a raw ingestion layer. So there's a single cost to have an ETL to bring all that data in, and a single business stakeholder. So actually there's not lots of different competing ideas around how the data should be used. There's an identified business owner, and that person has worked directly with the data team to bring the data into GBQ. And then we create what is essentially a data asset, and that's put into a separate layer within GCP. So we have separate projects, 3 different projects. So a bottom raw layer, an asset layer, which is then reusable across the business and can be explored by all the data engineers. And then there's a final layer, it's a service account, which means we can redact certain data, make sure it's secure and is hardened, and actually the privacy standards are met within certain areas. And then that can be extrapolated and sent out via either the digital marketing activation pipelines or even through Looker for data exploration within the Chalhoub group, or even with our joint ventures and our additional partners.
Yeah. So the core focus of this workshop is rather activating that data, not in building those assets, but of course we're open to a chat. We've done that also before, so if you guys are interested in building warehouses, we can chat after this presentation. So we don't focus on waterfall projects, like a one big project when you start with the requirements, you define data activation, and then you finish it saying data activation is done. We rather see it as a continuous improvement, so we work on a lot of new business cases where we try to clearly understand what is an objective of a marketing campaign or any kind of activity. Then we develop a solution, we test it, and we actually see if this is what we actually want to build, and then we try to launch it and deliver, so document the whole solution and maybe scale it across different brands. So we work centrally, and we always try to work with the brands in creating certain commonalities. So if we build a solution for one brand, like Level Shoes, if it works really great on a marketplace, why can't we copy it, an example, to Faces, that it's our beauty marketplace, so things are reusable, and because of that, we reduce the cost of development. Right, so I've noticed there were a lot of discussions about ROI and what is actually an ROI of all of those projects that we're running and ROI of all of the data activities. We actually like to flip the question sometimes with James, and we talk about what is the alternative of not doing anything, because inaction also comes with a cost. If you advertise on everyone on Google Ads, if you spam everyone on Facebook, on Instagram, your ads are very inefficient. Like, we sell very specific products, so if you're not a beauty customer, like, chances are that you're not gonna click on that ad. If you do any kind of like a research on Gen Z and millennial shoppers, they also expect ads and advertisement to be highly relevant. So we always say that it's better to invest before you actually spend that money in some sort of an uncontrolled way. And for us, COVID increased that spend. So all of our stores were closed in COVID. We accelerated building new websites, but we had no plan for data activation. So naturally, all of the budget that we would spend on the offline advertising, this would go all into digital, and we'd just buy ads everywhere without any control. So you can imagine the cost of not doing it can be way worse. So we can speak here about data attribution and how Google and Facebook actually sees your conversion. Because of their nature, they only can see the data that you provide to them, but you, as a business, need to track your spend across Google, Facebook, let's add Snapchat to the equation, and TikTok, and only with looking at the full picture, we can actually understand everything. On the other hand, after the Cambridge Analytica scandal, Facebook or Google are not very likely to give you a customer data back. So there is always a problem of working with the aggregated data, user privacy, but it doesn't mean nothing can be done.
Yeah, so we use this slide to sort of upwards manage our senior leaders in terms of how we're going to tackle this challenge, and we went down the road of looking at, so the tools Tomac's going to go into later are kind of based around the concept of a CDP. We deliberately repositioned our project to sort of not have to go through a certain RFP process with traditional CDP vendors, and we actually discovered during the process, for example, that Salesforce didn't really have a CDP. It had a DMP. They realized after Cambridge Analytica, or the way cookies are going, you couldn't really have a DMP, or actually if you wanted to store other people's data, you had to meet lots of different privacy and security concerns and how you warehouse that. So actually they were then going to say within about a year's time they'll have a CDP to sell us, but actually we needed a CDP now, but not so much a CDP, very much to the point of ITP or intelligent tracking prevention. We needed a way of actually resolving the identity of users on a website from anonymous click data and start to understand which of our customers come to visit our website through multiple devices. And what we tried to illustrate here, going left to right, essentially, is when you usually run an advertising campaign, and we talk about real-time data, like making real-time decisions and optimizations, but actually the reality of it is there are two use cases for business. You'll have strategic vision for your company. If you don't have a commercial vision, you don't have financial reporting, there's no point in having a marketing report. A big, I think the first question we were asked to answer was, what's going on with marketing spend, and have we got a positive ROI, and what's the ROI on our marketing? And the first thing I said to the business was, show me the financial reporting and show me the commercial reporting, because if you don't have a business objective, a business strategy, what I'm going to say is going to make no sense to what you're trying to achieve collectively. So by tackling that, one thing we tried to illustrate was the fact that when a campaign ends or a campaign's in flight from day 1 to day 30, that's not the point at which you stop counting or reattributing activity, because the customer life cycle and the customer journey does not end the moment they see an ad. They won't see an ad and then immediately make a decision to purchase. Obviously, not everyone here is working in sort of like fast consumer goods. We talk about airlines and other verticals where you have a much longer path to purchase or user journey, and tracking that across multiple devices on and off-site data can be obviously a very difficult thing to navigate, but specifically in the digital world, people feel everything's tangible, everything's trackable, and we're collecting all this data. The reality is you might not be. To capture and persist data is actually much more challenging. So let's say we have a 7-day attribution window. The campaign ended on day 30, and on day 37, even though the spend stopped on day 30, we're still adding all these sales back into Google and Facebook, and they're still claiming sales were driven from the activity that's ended on day 30. Obviously, what we need to then try and figure out is, well, one, actually, with iOS devices, which is purging data within 24 hours, and we can't really use cookie-based attribution. So actually, that day 30 to day 37 doesn't really exist. It's a day 31 stop-off, and they use probabilistic measurement models to actually try and understand what actually happened between day 2 and day 7. And obviously, that will then give you a Google and Facebook version of the truth. But obviously that's no good from a business and strategic point of view. You really need to know where to invest your money and the next campaign and how you're going to roll out over Q4, let's say.
So one thing that we also noticed from like chatting with Facebook and Google, they all would like to claim your sales. So if someone is searching from something from Google, Google is like, of course they purchase it because they search for it on Google. Then when you chat with social media, they always tell you, why did they search? Because they heard about it on social media. You should invest in social media. So it's quite a difficult task to solve. And this is a nice segue to like data activation. So we spoke a lot about analytics today, which I think is great. And you should analyze your data. We're also doing that. But it's impossible to actually make it actionable without forwarding this data somewhere else. And this is also connected to marketing automation. So we've heard a lot about data mesh. Sounds like this is a big topic right now. We think the world right now in cloud is connected, and it's great to analyze all of those events, but it's actually even better to take an action on it. So this is what we want to show you today. This slide comes from Hightouch, which is a reverse ETL provider. So they specialize in forwarding the data that is already in your data warehouse. So if you don't have a data warehouse, then you should get one. But if you have one already, there are plenty of vendors that can help you activate this data across different channels. This can be data like CRM objects, right? So customer records. This can be events. So we can tell Facebook, hey, this sale happened on our website or in our store, which is great, right? Because if we know that we're advertising for something and someone bought something in the store, we should send it back to Facebook and tell them, hey, this campaign is working, let's do more of that. Audiences, so we're going to speak a lot today about segmentation and building customer segments. So if you know that someone is your VIP customer, probably you should spend money on advertising to them, not to the people that are not interested in your product. Of course, file uploads, notifications, and tasks. So if the data is already in your warehouse, you don't need to spend a lot of money on like IT, building some unnecessary services. Just get a reverse ETL tool. We use Hightouch. There are plenty of them. There is Census. There are other players on the market. It's way easier than building everything custom. So there is a maturity curve in the way you can adopt those kind of solutions. And that's why we wanted to focus today on 3 practical exercises. One's very simple, and it's a lot about like transactional data and looking into customer identities. So you have to start with just getting your data in one place. A lot of you work for groups, from what I noticed. This means your customer data might be scattered across different databases, or maybe even different brands. Aggregate it in one place, get rid of all of the duplicates, build that customer profile, and see how much is he spending across different brands, across different stores, and build that first-party repository. So it's something like, I think the guys from Click mentioned how important it is to build the one source of truth. So you definitely need that. Then you can go into analytics, so actually understanding how many customers you have, how many new customers did you acquire, and this is like a first step to understanding where we are at the moment, what is the baseline. I can say that at Chalhoub Group, we're definitely not, at the very end of that. It's still a journey for us. So we've been doing that for a while, and we're still learning, but we think it's way worth it. So the next step that you do is actually trying to use certain events, either in your stores or on your website, to trigger certain marketing campaigns or certain activities. We're going to show you how to do it, and then optimize for paid media. So I'm going to show you in practical way how to get your data, build an audience, upload it to Facebook, to Google Ads. When you're done with that, then you can start thinking about topics like CX, hyper-personalization of your website, and going into those micro-segments and personalized experiences. So we had a very interesting panel yesterday about CX, and we're definitely into it, and we're going to show you how we can connect the dots. But I think if you don't have a data warehouse, then probably it's not a good moment to do something more complex, right?
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I think what we were actually discussing was actually who should own, CX. And I think the reality is everyone's responsibility within a business. There shouldn't be any one team. Obviously, the prerogative of the customer service and support teams is to deal with an immediate problem with a customer. But actually, at every touch point along the customer journey, there are completely different teams solving very different customer-centric problems. And I think essentially that was essentially our takeaway was it shouldn't potentially sit with one person. And I think it's more interesting for Tomasz as well because he's recently stepped up into a role where I think he deliberately sidestepped the CX part of the business for potentially that very reason.
Yeah, I think it's you always need to learn how to walk before you learn how to run. And we actually were quite proud of doing like basic and simple things. And I also think you don't always need to overcomplicate some stuff when it comes to data. You just have to put it in a context and make it actionable. Does it make sense? Any questions to what we've seen?
Is anyone still uploading customer data using CSVs to ad platforms? Does anybody do digital marketing or digital advertising in here? Is everyone super data focused? You're all interested in data warehousing.
So maybe I can tell you what we used to do, which was a little bit crazy. So when we were trying to advertise for a certain like group of customers on Facebook, someone would go to a CRM system, try to like download hundreds of CSV files and then upload them to Facebook. Like not only this is not great for like multiple privacy reasons. Luckily, it's not the reality right now, but you can't do this exercise every day. We have at the moment, I think, 1,500 active connections with different ad platforms. So I can't imagine someone downloading 1,500 different segments every day and then trying to upload it into different platforms. But it is a reality in, I think, a lot of companies in Dubai that things are not automated. And sometimes we don't invest into automation because we assume, okay, it's always been like that. It's just a one-time thing. Let's not overcomplicate things and do it manually. But I think also with the new privacy law kicking in UAE, that's going to become even more important because things have to be encrypted and not exposed to any end user to make sure that we don't lose the customer data. All right. So again, how did this look like somehow in Chalhoub Group? Bless you. So we had multiple connections built in siloed using those cookies with Google Ads, with Facebook, with Salesforce. And we actually didn't know that much about our customers in the first place. So we could only have a transactional data. So someone buys something with the group, and we know that it is a customer, he bought this and this product, this is the amount of transaction. Maybe we can know something about the location where the transaction happened, but that's it. And if you think about it, like the websites in digital convert here at around 1%, which means you lose 99% of data about your customers in the first place. So that's already problematic. And if you use tools like Google Analytics, they actually don't allow you to track customer data because it only allows you to track anonymized data. You cannot put any kind of PII there. So you can't really use it for CRM or any data activation. So that was our baseline, just the transactional data. And we naturally wanted to evolve into a point when we stitch the transactional data with the behavioral data. So this is what we want to chat about today. So how to actually maybe combine that email with something that happened on the website and turn it into marketing outcome. So at this moment, we use two platforms. One is a customer data platform called mParticle. It's also used by companies like Airbnb or Walmart. We also use HighTouch. That is a very cool startup that helps us with data activation. So one thing that we've noticed from the CDP market, from talking to companies like Segment, like Tilium, like mParticle, they're all great, but they have a view that you should only use customer data platform as CDP to activate your data, which I think is great for a lot of use cases, but it doesn't cover all of them. What we've noticed with HighTouch, they try to push the agenda that you should only use your data warehouse. We think those two can coexist, and at the moment, we use two of them for also different brands. So because of the different maturity of Chalhoub brands, the ones that are very early in the process, they just launched their website, they don't have maybe capacity to invest into a big customer data platform like mParticle, we just help them with HighTouch. But the ones like Level Shoes that have a really big store, a lot of customer data and resources, we go all in and we try to work with mParticle.
There's one other thing on this is, we don't just want to resolve all the customer identities. Sometimes people aren't our customers. We can't resolve it. So, but actually, we still want to send those behavioral signals back to the ad platforms. So we persist like Facebook Click IDs, Gclid IDs from Google, and we'll just stitch those back to an event and pass those back using the server-side pipelines through HighTouch to make sure we get that full, complete window of JavaScript and server-side tracking.
Awesome.
And then this was, again, my simplified way of trying to relay the difference between web tracking, which is traditionally done with a data layer, JavaScript data layer on the left-hand side in green, and then app tracking, which is very much reliant on using an app measurement partner nowadays. So we use Adjust as our sort of source of truth for resolving sort of install attribution. With tech vendors, but the difference is there, and obviously if anyone did here work in the covertly in the digital marketing industry, they'd know that Google Analytics is being sunsetting Universal Analytics, or Google is sunsetting Universal Analytics for GA4, and what GA4 does is it builds off the back of essentially Firebase and app tracking, so the event scheme is completely different, and I think I famously said to internal teams it'll be years before we need to make any changes, and actually it's very much a year, so that all got announced in the last couple of months. So we've, going back to Tomac's sort of like life cycle of our products, actually we don't have sort of end-to-end delivery, so it kind of quite smoothly went into the fact that actually it wasn't going to change dramatically what we were trying to deliver in the first place. It's just going to slightly evolve from having, a GTag event on the website or a Universal Analytics data layer to having a GA4 data layer, and how actually the methodology of how we capture the data essentially is this. And what I wanted to differentiate here for the business, especially with what GA4 does, is Google obviously was dictating to us how we should capture our data, and obviously the maturity of Google Analytics 4 isn't potentially where you'd want it to be, and obviously the endpoints we send data to will have their own schemas and definitions of data, so in order to obviously align everything, we wanted to master our data structure, so what we ended up doing was just fully adopting the Google or the app tracking and Firebase events to make sure our web aligned already. mParticle essentially is a sort of sandbox. We get to decide how we curate a data plan to what events are meaningful for us as a business. So working obviously in fashion and luxury retail, so obviously there are specific signals we want to capture. But actually what I wanted to say is GA4 does come with an enterprise license and you have to pay for it. So if we're going to pay for something, do we have to pay for Google Analytics 4, or do we consider something in-house, like Snowplow, which actually can be installed within the GCP environment, which actually means you can actually, no one can dictate to you or you're not going to be disrupted by industry changes anymore. You can start to build out a long-term data plan within your own environment, and that will be a true server-side and data capture analytics environment. Obviously, having to do that within 12 months is ambitious, to say the least. So it's something I wanted to put out there for the teams, especially to Google, to just so that actually we don't want to be reliant on people, essentially in the long term. But actually, there's a couple of interesting things here as well, where I've just deliberately put mParticle going through high touch up and to the right above the dotted line. And the dotted line, there's a huge latency and transformation process that happens when you bring data into a warehouse, whereas actually mParticle allows us to send packets of information in real time straight back to our platforms without having to ingest that, model it, and then send that back through another pipeline. So actually, you want to have these two things in mind when you're actually trying to architect your data capture environment.
Yeah, actually speaking about like real time versus not real time, if you're calculating like your VIP customer segment, probably it doesn't change every minute. So if I assume that you're a VIP customer, like it's not going to change overnight. We don't need to recalculate it every minute. So those are things that I think you can easily do in your data warehouse, and it's just way easier because you can combine the data about customer coming from different sources. With events, however, if let's say someone goes to our store in Dubai Mall and buys something in Level Shoes, let's not show him ads for our website for at least a week because he already bought something. There is no point in like burning budget, so you need to make sure that this is real time. So it doesn't make sense to do it 3 days later when this person already probably browsed Facebook and saw our ads everywhere, right? Cool. So this is the theory. So I assume this was the boring part. If you guys feel that I was boring, now it should be more exciting with the practical exercise. Don't worry about the slides. There is nothing here that it's secret, so we can just share the slide deck with you, or you can send us an email. Are there any questions to the, let's say, intro part, or yes? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I mean, this is, I think, very important slide because it talks about maturity, and the second level includes the KPIs. This level is too important because it helps us to measure the maturity. My question here, can you give us some examples of KPIs by which we can measure maturity?
We also got that question from our board, so I think it is a very relevant question to ask, right? And like, naturally, we think all of this has a commercial value. So if we start measuring that, we can see how many customers do we acquire and how much do we pay for a new customer and for a returning customer, right? So naturally, the platforms, Facebook or Google Ads, they don't know who is a new customer or returning customer. They just see if your campaign is working. If we have those KPIs in place and we know how much we pay in general for one order and how much we pay for a new customer and for a returning customer, improving those steps should reduce that cost. Like if it's not reducing your cost of customer acquisition or cost of returning order, then naturally you're doing something wrong. I would say numbers are sometimes very good in telling you like what happens, but not always what is the reason. So we looked into our marketing reports and we see marketing is not working. Why? We don't know, because the data doesn't tell you this. Naturally, there were some issues with our marketing setup in the Google Ads. We were actually spamming everyone that searches for L'Occitane keyword. Even if you say, I hate L'Occitane, I don't want to buy anything from them, right? We still would trigger an ad. But the data just tells us the part of the story. We need to come with solution together. But if you look at this, the step 3 actually helps us to reduce the marketing costs, because if we can actually trigger a free campaign, like an email campaign that brings you back to the website and mentions like, hey, maybe you forgot about that item, but it's still available, then we reduce the cost. If you actually target only on your specific audience, I will show you in a second, then again, we're reducing the cost because we're advertising only for the people that are relevant to us, so this cost goes down. Then we look into our own media and cross-channel orchestration or website. if you can actually tailor the website a little bit better, let's say we've done everything with our spend, but we improve the website, that you actually have a better experience, then we again reduce the cost because we need to get less people on the website to actually reduce that cost. So eventually we think that all of those steps, they add up and they reduce the cost of customer acquisition, right? Or ideally also the lifetime value of a customer. If the website is great, people want to revisit.
Yeah, I think one thing we've obviously done, just going back to the dashboard KPIs question, is trying to demonstrate the usage of the first-party data. So I think someone put an arbitrary metric, like 80% of first-party customer data within our advertising.
That was me.
Was it? But actually, instead of reporting on the sort of like arbitrary metrics that come out of like campaign performance, is actually just looking at the actual structure of our campaigns. Google has a really cool maturity framework, essentially, how it operates. I think there was a good book, Crawl, Walk, Run, is it? By the guys at Infotrust, is it the tag management solution? Essentially, like Google have a see, think, do, care strategy for digital marketing, and essentially what it is a full funnel operational structure for how to run your ads. But actually, if you then layer that with the sort of crawl, walk, run methodology, and you actually ask yourself as a business, and I think Adosa mentioned this in his talks about those sort of like frameworks, you ask yourself challenging business questions around what you're trying to achieve with how you're operating, and then actually you start breaking that into those sort of structures. So we essentially score ourselves from at Dyson, we had like a DMF, the digital maturity framework. We rank ourselves from 0 would be we haven't started, but like 1 to 3 in terms of how well the brands think they're, or the markets as per se, are in terms of how they're running their activity. Then we'd ask the agency to how well they think they're running the activity, and then collectively work with our ad tech vendors, Google specifically, to understand, to think about which tools are available that we're not utilizing, and actually structurally how are our campaign accounts set up from an account health and hygiene perspective. And I actually quite like to score accounts in terms of like what I expect to see. So I actually quite like the first party use. So one thing we noticed straight away from ourselves, from a maturity point of view, is we weren't actually using audience layers. So even though cookieless has been like a moot point or an issue within the business for years now, especially with the data privacy concerns, we weren't actually sending any Google audience data back to the ad platforms. So essentially I put 0 in terms of operational point of view. We weren't using cookie data. We're definitely not in a position, or we're now in a position to start using first party data, but actually to make use of it properly, you need to understand how to use it and how to segment people, what cohorts to create, what sort of structure and operational things you want to be targeting, and what sort of personas and behaviors you think are important. But actually, there was no concept of that in the business, so it was a big 0 for me. And I think, but the brands themselves feel like they're doing a fantastic job, and all you ever hear, the further you go up in a business, is positivity. Everything's going well, everything's fine, and if you start saying negative things or things that don't allude to things being positive, you'll be more pragmatic or progressive, or there are certain terms. So actually, it's important to frame it in a way, essentially have a bit of a common enemy. So using things like ITP and saying there's obviously the challenge with the industry, we're being disrupted, or it's Apple's fault. We'll try and frame it in a way that actually makes people feel that there's an opportunity for everyone to be more successful and go in the right direction and be more cohesive. So I think that's kind of where I would try and use data to inform change as opposed to just the arbitrary metrics of primary, secondary KPIs in terms of like sales, clicks, impressions.
All right. Now the practical exercise. So I'm just going to set the scene and then jump straight into my browser. Even if you don't have a customer data warehouse or you don't have anything like super sophisticated in place, you should have some sort of a table of customers or like table of transactions. And I think sometimes even with something like that, you can do a pretty good damage with your digital advertising. So only if you have your transactions, maybe it's not enough to cover all of your customers, but you can use something that it's called lookalike audiences on Facebook and Google Ads. Right? So it's Google way or Facebook way of saying, okay, those are your customers. I'm just going to bring people that are statistically very similar to your customers, and we're just going to try to prospect them instead of prospecting everyone. So if this is how your, let's say, 100,000 VIP customer looks like, let's bring 1% of people that are demographically similar to them. So even if you don't have a big customer data warehouse, probably you can still figure out the demographics of your customer. So sometimes your customer register, you already know their language, nationality, or age, and that's already enough. Well, if you collect the data for birthday, but that's already enough to actually slice it. Similarly with behavioral data, like we've noticed that with our transactions, we know if someone is buying something for gift wrapping. So this is big for brands like Swarovski. They're actually heavy on gifting. And now when we launch a new campaign that is actually advertising for gifting season, we use pool of customers that bought a gift wrapping for their product. So it's actually quite interesting. And also, if you just have sales, probably you know something about the products that were bought there. So it's either a brand of the product or category of a product, so we can slice that data. Similarly with geographic information, if we know that this customer bought in UAE, let's just don't advertise for them in Saudi. Right? Transactional data like traditional RFM model, so figuring out how many times those customers bought something, what was the monetary value, their lifetime value, did they buy something recently or not. So this is pretty cool for things like reactivation of lapsed customers. If we've noticed that they've been buying with us for a while, but they haven't purchased recently, so maybe let's design a campaign to bring them back or offer them some sort of a voucher, right? So I'm going to stop sharing the presentation right now and open HighTouch, which is one of the platforms that we're using. So I built a couple of workspaces. Essentially, HighTouch is a tool for data activation. So if you have some sort of a database or data warehouse, it connects there, it builds your model of data, and then just syncs it with like Facebook ads. So I built a couple of like demo accounts, and I put some dummy data so we can test it together. So we go to sources, and I already configured things, but I can show you guys how to build it yourself. So it's pretty much vendor agnostic. So there are guys from Snowflake there. You can already see Snowflake here. Some of you might use Amazon, so you can connect to Redshift. That is their solution. You can even use static files from FTP, Google Sheets. We have Microsoft Server, SQL Server. We obviously use BigQuery, but you can use any kind of a popular data warehouse. I think only Azure Synapse is missing. But then again, there are ways around it, right? So our configuration is pretty simple. We have a nice source in BigQuery called Velocity, and it's literally as easy as linking it to a specific project and then creating credentials. So there are two things that you have to do practically. If you guys want to chat about it, it's very simple. If you're in BigQuery, just gonna move this one here. You go to your admin settings. Okay, let's leave this query for later.
You don't want to mention where your customer data came from?
Yes, I generated myself with a Python package, so it's not a real customer data. So there is a service account that we need to authorize. So pretty much this way, we're telling HighTouch, you can access our data. If you want to query it or read it, it's fine to do so. This configuration is slightly different per different warehouses, but it's not something that takes more than 5 minutes, so nice and easy. You can test the connection, see that this is working. Looks fine, so we can start building models. Now with models, actually HighTouch offers two ways of doing it. One is a more technical way, which somehow we gravitate to, but there is also a simplified way that I'll explain later. But what we do here, if we have already that like customer table or sales table, we just build a model that syncs customer data. So I'm going to go right now to BigQuery and show you what kind of data I've prepared for the workshop today. All right. BigQuery. Here we go. So our sandbox. Velocity. Again, it's not your data, it's not Velocity customers. I just call it like that because of the conference. So we have two tables. One is called sale, when we have some invoices, stock code, quantity, and it is some dummy sales data that I just uploaded from Kaggle. And there is also a table of customers. So again, a dummy data and dummy Gmail that I've created. Now we assume that we can match this data in some way with either Google Ads or with Facebook. So I think 99% of you are using those products, right? So either Instagram, either Google Ads, Gmail, Google Maps, something is there. So we can take this data and upload it there and just try to create an audience. Naturally, it is fake data, so we're not going to get much, but it's just to go through the exercise together. So I have sales here and customer data. I'm just going to try to query it. And to speed up this process, I prepared that query for myself on my cheat sheet. But if there is something that you guys would like to build, like a specific segment of customers, we can obviously go through it together. Just going to copy that query. I hope some of you are familiar with SQL. If not, we can chat about it later. It's very nice. I think I just renamed that table. Let me go to my previous query. 1 second. All right, this works better. So what I did here, I just merged the data from sales and customers and extracted all of the customer ID and all of the user emails. So we're just going to try to build a model of that data together in high touch and sync it with our ad platforms. Go here. Let's build a new model. Select our source. We have only one, so that's pretty simple. There are, again, plenty of ways of doing it. If you use Looker as your BI platform, you can leverage that. If you use dbt for data modeling, it's also there. I'm just going to paste my query. We can preview and actually see in high touch if we can read customer information and set up that model. Nice, perfect. Now let's call it Data Summit Demo. Let's do it like that. Perfect. Now we have to choose a primary key. So we actually have in that table a unique identifier. It is a customer ID. For those of you that are into databases, know that there might be a different primary keys, but it's just our way of telling high touch what is the common denominator for all of those users, right? So some databases use phone numbers, some of them they use emails. We assume it's a customer ID. It's just for high touch to understand if there is a new ID, there is a new customer, and we have to sync it with our ad platform, right? There we go. And we have our nice model created. So it is created in high touch. Now I'm just going to have to sync it with our ad account that I also prepared for this conference. So I'm going to go here and just build a new sync. So I've authorized here Facebook ads and Google ads. It's actually quite simple. It's as simple as logging to Facebook or to Google ads. So
you can get a destinations on the left and just show.
Yeah. So actually, there are plenty of other destinations that you can use. So they range from marketing tools, sales tools, analytics, support tools. So you can take this data and sync with no code, with pretty much anything. Our case is tied to our business problem, so Facebook ads and Google ads not performing. But you might have a case to sync it with your Salesforce CRM, right?
Yeah, and a good thing of the good problem that this solves for us is we were relying on sort of a single data engineer writing the API and managing it, versioning it. Every time a new version came out, you have to update your API. So obviously, having to do that for every single endpoint across multiple brands creates quite a bottleneck in your business. So actually using a sort of managed service API solution like HighTouch, there's plenty of ETL solutions that do the same thing, but having the ability to send data out and not having to worry about internal bottlenecks and version control has been a great thing for us to really activate off 2 years worth of customer data modeling from our data team.
Yeah, I mean, it becomes a bigger issue if you have a lot of data. So if you have billions of rows, kind of syncing them every day manually, it's a bit of a pain. So our data set here is not as big. I just created a very small data set, but if you have a lot of data, it becomes very important. So we go back to our model, and let's sync it. So I'm just going to build the sync with our Facebook ad account. We need to map this data. So we only have emails, but naturally it can be the case that your customer is using different email with Facebook and different email with your transactional website. So you can also map different fields like phone number. Some of the brands here, they only have a phone number. If it's a mobile app that only has a phone number, so it's good to know. We can call this audience data summit demo. And we ask high touch to actually hash the information, which means we encrypt this data before it goes to Facebook. We actually encrypt this data even before it hits high touch, because we're super secure. But if you don't have something like that in place, you can actually do it automatically. Then you can schedule this kind of a job. So with certain things, you don't have to run it every 5 minutes. So we're just going to test it and try to run it every day with you. Perfect. And we have sync created. So now I'm going to try to go to my Facebook Business Manager and actually see if this appears there. It might take a couple of minutes, so maybe we'll go back to this exercise in a little bit. But you can see the audience that I created before. It's actually here. So the customer data that I built here in the morning, it's actually synced with Facebook platform. And you can see the history of updates. So Facebook actually tells us how often is this database updated and what is going on with those users. So every day you can see how many rows were added if someone was removed. This means if you run an advertisement campaign and someone is no longer, let's say, your VIP customer, or if someone is added to your past purchasers, this is all being updated automatically, and you don't have to touch anything. So pretty nice to work if you have a lot of syncs like that. You can build a similar connection with Google Ads. So on every ad account, you have a tab called Audience Manager. And this way you can see how many people are recognized on Google site. Again, Google works a little bit different than Facebook, so I think like prospecting for new customers and targeting, especially important on social media. With Google, we always know the intent because someone has a keyword, so I think it's easier to do it without audience, but still you should do suppression and targeting on Google.
Yeah, that, for search and shopping for sure. I think when it gets into programmatic and display and video, yeah, it's always important to have a good understanding of your customer segments. But,
right,
yeah.
So for us, we have some of the brands like Tanagra that sell very luxury products. So naturally, if we see that Google's trying to advertise on a non-premium location, it's not ideal for us, so we try to do those things. Again, you can see the size of the audience is 0 because we're using dummy data, but it works.
A good thing just to mention as well, it's really important that the naming structure of your segment is meaningful because you can't obviously export any value out of Google from who you were targeting. So if you, whatever you put into the platform, you'll get out. So if you understand, like, you're targeting new, or let's say it's a prospecting audience, or they're specifically interested in beauty or makeup or skincare, if you have meaningful data in your data warehouse and you've created a specific cohort or segment, add that to your naming convention for your audiences, because it will reflect in the ad platform, and when you do your post-campaign reporting, you'll be able to associate your segment layering with that campaign performance to understand who responded better to the ad creatives based upon the data you fed into the platform. You will never get the individual data out, so it's really important you have a master naming convention standard.
Yeah. All right. So that was pretty simple, I think. All right, we can go to more advanced use cases, unless we have any questions from the audience. Does this make sense? Any questions? All right, cool. Let's do something more interesting. Now we're going to create some data. So we already had data coming from transactions, but we're speaking about collection of events and how we can actually use them. So James was kind enough to build a website for this conference, just so we can get some dummy data for you guys. We mentioned that we use mParticle as our customer data platform. This means we collect the data on the website. We try to mix it with so-called digital breadcrumbs. So if someone leaves an email with us or customer phone number, we try to stitch it into one profile and then activate it across different channels. So for now, we're using it mainly for marketing, but there is a way to access the data in real-time API. So if you develop a website and you just want to ask API and say, does this person, James Schlesinger, belongs to our VIP segment? API will tell you back, yes, this person belongs to this, and this segment. So it's quite useful for personalization. You can put all of your data warehouse there, plus your real-time events. Pretty cool tool. Next one. So what I'm about to show, it's actually a very shortened version of like what you do normally with that process. So it takes around like 2 to 3 months to properly implement customer data platform. And it's rather, I would say, an enterprise tool. There are some CDPs like Segment that offer cool plan for startups, so you can also start small. But like, it's something that like requires a little bit of thinking and trying to like gather people internally and think about what do you actually want to know about your customers. Do you want to know if they add something to the basket? If you want to know if they visit a specific page? I've seen people coming from like a banking industry here, from retail, hospitality. So data layer is different for like every website. And we have one that is focused on retail, but there are different use cases. Then naturally it requires a little bit of development on the website. If you don't have a good data layer, it's something that you have to implement. Then we collect all of those events in mParticle and compare them against our data plan. So we can actually see if what we collect is what we expect to see. This way, we make sure that the standards of like data in the CDP are up to our requirements. And then we can actually start connecting this data with Facebook. So again, here we do a nice and easy 15-minute demo, but it actually takes longer and requires a little bit more consideration. So let's go straight to mParticle. So this is our main dashboard of mParticle. There are only 4 active users. It's me and James, and then me and James using fake emails. So no one else, unfortunately, visited our website in the last 24 hours. But let's go now to the website. Perfect. So we access it through that nice URL. And it's something that we built for that conference, so you guys can see what kind of events can be collected and how we can activate it across different channels. So we've uploaded a couple of dummy products on this website. And I'm going to try to log in here and see if mParticle can understand who I am and collect that data. And we'll try to send it later to Facebook. So I'm just going to use maybe something like this. And register a new user. And now, for those of you guys that are maybe new to data collection on the websites have something that is called a data layer. And thanks to this, we can actually understand something about the website and the visitor. So we can surface some information like this nice email address and use it to track it across different channels. So I can send that email to Facebook, to Google. I can send it to our CDP, to our data warehouse, and we can start stitching that information. It's more difficult if I don't log in, so I just had to log in. But let's try to look into that use case. So I'm going to go back to my website and actually try to see what is my mParticle ID. So a customer data platform puts a unique ID on your website, and we're going to see if this little ID that it's stored here tracked me exactly in the way I expect it to track. So let me go back here, go to user activity, search for our ID. And there is someone, right? So we can find some information about the customer. We know this person just seen our website, and it's all in real time. We haven't gone to any segmentation yet, but it's super useful if you actually want to collect that behavioral data. So if you have multiple websites, we can start collecting this and stitching and adding to the history. So this way we can, let's say, figure out who is our VIP customer that visited a product a day ago. So naturally, those users are more likely to convert, more likely to buy from us, so we reduce the advertisement cost. Right, so I'm going to go right now and visit the product. And we can see if the event was collected. So I'm going to go back to mParticle, check the overview. And I can see even in live stream data that there is some data coming in. So when we collect this information, we can start building audiences. So mParticle has a way easier system of like building segments. We don't have to write SQL here. It's as easy as just being a marketer and selecting a source of data. You can build it based on multiple workspaces here. I'm just going to get velocity data. I'm going to call it demo with audience. Perfect. Let's create this one. I'm just going to add a criteria. It's an e-commerce criteria. And maybe we want to track people that viewed a product, right? So I can create that segment, and hopefully I'll see some people joining that segment. Now, at the moment, the segment might be small because it's just me and James. So, as you can see, our website is not very popular, but we have those 2 users being added to this one. This is already 5 because I've created some fake email addresses. So, of course, if you want to advertise effectively, you need to get thousands of people to your website to start a campaign. But for the sake of this demo, I'm just going to build this one based on like 5 people. So again, you can connect a nice output of those user IDs, connect it with Google Ads, or we can add Facebook here. All right, let's try to use Facebook. This we don't need. This is for the mobile, so it's all good. All right.
You don't want full IDs? No. Yeah. Was MailChimp not successful?
Oh, 1 second. Voila. I mean, of course, we have to activate it, but it's very good for tracking anything behavioral. Now, when you go to connections, there are a lot of different partners, so you can start using this data and activate it across, again, pretty much anything. I'm just going to show you the directory of the connections that are available. So we focus a lot here on the digital advertising, but we've implemented some interesting use cases with Salesforce. That is our CRM tool. So when someone visits something on the Chalhoub website and they abandon a basket, we send that data through mParticle to Salesforce. There is no cost associated with that. So everything goes through mParticle as our customer data platform. We trigger abandoned basket emails. We trigger any kind of like marketing activity. If you want to check the directory, it's pretty much everything from like analytics to customer service, data warehousing. We also store that data raw for analytics purposes. So if you want to see maybe who from your VIP customers has visited your website, you can extract that data, put it in Amazon, put it in Redshift, put it in Snowflake, and just mix with other data sources. So it's like a new asset that you create for your company. We use mParticle, but there are a couple of other vendors like Tilium, Segment, to name a few. Salesforce we can add to that equation. And maybe the last thing is that this kind of a solution lets you track other data sources like stores, so you also can add your store sale and then maybe combine a segment of people that bought something in the store but they've never been to the website, and then activate them in your digital channels.
Yeah, so there are 3 IDs essentially that we rely on to do sort of identity resolution. Facebook will provide a click ID, Google will provide a click ID. It knows the person who clicked on an ad, but it won't share that person with you, so it's important you persist that data. mParticle stores those click IDs, and it will stitch those click IDs to an mParticle ID. The mParticle ID will only resolve to a customer ID if we send customer ID identity information back into mParticle to complete that picture, but it's still useful to persist that data, have an mParticle ID, and send all these events back into the ad tech platform to tackle the ITP cookieless problems. But we actually work with mParticle to create a hierarchy of importance in terms of how we resolve a customer ID. And our customer team, our data team, have spent years actually doing that same process, looking at multiple devices, emails, phone numbers used with the same customer. They've got multiple customer records and then unique customer record, and then we send that unique one back to mParticle to sort of complete that picture. I don't know if it's worth looking at the data plan in the setup as well.
Of course. Maybe just a quick glance.
And this obviously makes it a really easy way to have, without having to tear up your underlying data layer or the metadata on your website or the SDK in your app. You can actually roll out different versions of data plans without having to sort of like rip out the foundations of your platforms. And you can also translate multiple different variants of like SDKs and data layers into like a single source of truth with mParticle. And actually it does lots of data quality checks on ingestion as well. So actually you can identify and capture and resolve problems in data quality at point of capture, as well as obviously at the endpoint themselves.
Cool. So now, if there are no questions, we're going to go to the last exercise to leave some time for maybe Q&A. If not, a longer networking break. We obviously want to talk about CX and going a little bit beyond just collecting the data and events. So there were a lot of discussions about how to use the data in CX. We like to be practical and just focus on some stories from our work when we actually had a problem and we try to solve it in a proactive way. So we constantly redesign our websites based on the feedback that we get from the customer. One very interesting source of data is quality data, qualitative data. So we record sessions of users and actually try to identify a friction in that session. So if someone visits one of our websites, we track the events that happen there and try to detect customer struggle, or if someone has any issues converting on our websites. So we use a tool that is called Quantum Metric. Again, don't advertise for them. Plenty of tools that literally do the same thing. What it helps us is filter down the sessions and find sessions where actually user struggled, and we analyze it and then redesign a website. As we mentioned, it's not enough, so we want to focus on data activation and maybe try to do something more actionable. And of course, we're going to redesign the website, but that's going to be like a year later. So this customer is already going to leave our website, and probably it's just not fast enough. But we can do something to recover that customer, and this is something that we want to show you guys today. So when Quantum Metric detects an error on our website, like an API timeout on long-running spinner or maybe a rage click, actually this information becomes available in API. And what we want to tell you today is that it's not only about collecting user behaviors, but collecting different platforms to improve your customer experience. So I'm going to go to the website and try to pretend that I'm a very angry customer and perform that rage click. So we sometimes see, like, when people click multiple times, there is an element of the website that is just inactive, or maybe it's too small and customer cannot hit that specific button and they become really frustrated, or something doesn't load. So Quantum Metric can surface that information and surface an event that it's called rage click here. So you can see it here in the left upper corner. After I did that nasty click, it comes up here, and we fire an event to send that back to mParticle. So we're basically saying, this is velocity@gmail.com. this guy is really frustrated on our website. Let's do something about it. Now, with something like mParticle, we can actually forward that event. So we can either build an audience of people that actually suffered from a rage click, right? Like this one here. So we actually target an unknown event that it's called rage click, or we can forward the event. And the beauty of it, it comes with real time. So if you have a CRM system and you would like to send this person a coupon, you can put an email saying, hey, we've noticed that you've been a little bit frustrated on our website. Maybe this is a 10% voucher, or you can actually send this data to Salesforce so someone can call this person and actually ask what's going on. So we've noticed that like this information can be quite actionable. So at my previous work at Altair Group, we literally blocked the whole tech team to start working on a bug on the website because the customer told us that our payments are not working. Then what we've noticed during a session, the interview, is that this person put a credit card number in the name and put a name where the number should go. So naturally, that shouldn't happen, but we just designed a website in a wrong way that lets you put numbers where the letters should go, right? But you can action those things, send an email, and it's something that it can be pretty automatic. Questions? Perfect. All right, guys, so that's it. That's everything that we've prepared for you. I hope this was interesting. If you want to follow up in a more casual conversation, please do so. We're going to leave you with our contacts. Questions, well, if there are none, we go straight to networking.
Sorry, I have a question.
Yeah, please.
So thank you for that. It was very informative. In which use case would you use the mParticle approach, and in which use case would you use the high-touch approach? Or would you use them in conjunction?
Yeah.
Do you want to go back to the slide with the tech stack?
Yeah, awesome. Very, very cool.
I saw a daily debate with me and Tomasz.
It's life in practice. James, should I answer, or do you want to go?
No, you go. Yeah, you go.
So I think for everything that it's more closer to real time when we really want to action very fast, like mParticle is just very easy, because then dropping this data in BigQuery, recalculating it, and forwarding through high touch sounds a bit tedious. Then on top of that, there's always going to be those cases when you want to do personalization on the website, and you need that mParticle API to tell you something about that customer. And it's just very difficult to achieve with something like high touch or with Google Cloud, because you would have to build it custom. And we think it would be too expensive for us to build it custom. So I think for behavioral stuff and things that are real time and improving the website, it's very good, but there is an overlap. And like, I think what we've noticed, like mParticle says, hey, stay with CDPs, and reverse ETL tools say, stay with us and use your data warehouse at a CDP. So there is always going to be an overlap, and I think like there is a distinction, but the lines are blurry.
Yeah, so I'd say, like, as Tomasz mentioned, we have like 500 stores in Chalhoub, so like 90% of our customer data is going to be in our data warehouse, not having a digital footprint, so it's not productive, or like doesn't make any sense to have mParticle as an additional bottleneck to sending that data back through to the M platform. So all of our customer data that comes from stores will still go through high touch. mParticle sort of bolts on top, gives us that digital visibility and to help resolve those digital identities for offline purchases. And then that additional benefit of mParticle as well is actually being able to leverage all the anonymous data and still reattribute all these events back to counteract the cookieless ITP problems. So essentially, there should be a bit of harmonization there. So it's not an either-or, and I think we have quite an organic approach to our tech stack. I think it's constantly evolving, but it seems to make good sense at the moment to have it this way.
We spoke with a lot of CDP customers, and they tell us, well, it is a bit of a pain, because if you have historical data and you want to do some changes in your CDP configuration, you have to pump it again, so it becomes a bit of a nightmare.
Yeah, go to the slide with Snowplow, because I think the conversation got quite interesting when we were looking at one GA4. So we literally considered Snowplow as the sort of in-house data capture as an alternative to mParticle, because it offers the similar thing. It gives you that ability to have a data schema, that data quality, and persist all your data. But actually, obviously, to do that, you have to manage essentially the infrastructure yourself. You're installing software within GCP as opposed to leveraging someone else's managed platform. So I think we realized from a maturity point of view, I think the question was earlier, like we weren't at the right stage to actually fully in-house our analytics capability. But actually, I think the interesting point comes in when you start to consider a snowplow versus an M-particle, whereas high touch, I think, still would be a player regardless of which other vendor you went with in that space. Cool.
Cool. So what, we get 10 minutes back from...
12 minutes.
12 minutes. Guys, thank you so much. It was a pleasure.